it's 2 inches of insulation, an R12 with a 1/2 inch zip board, and it was just a blast to put it on. I also dug up the foundation down 3 feet with a friend with a shovel.
You don't like this guy, right? Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Vermont cabinet maker Dennis Bessette. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can ask questions and leave feedback there too. Uncle Dennis, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast, buddy.
Well, thank you for having me.
We should tell folks that you're not exactly my uncle. You're my wife's uncle. And we spent a lot of time together. I think you were probably the first family member I've had on the show. Well, I know you are. Yeah. And I'm grateful that you agreed to do this. Thank you very much.
Well, we'll see how this goes. You may not want to run it.
So I can tell you that I see your cabinets in the background behind you. You're obviously a cabinet maker, as I said earlier. Can you tell me how you became a cabinet maker?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I didn't start out in woodworking. I started out, grew up in an apartment house, and out of 5 brothers, my mother selected me to help her do the wallpaper. And we had a 22-room apartment house, and every time somebody moved, we'd wallpaper a few rooms and paint and whatnot. And I started.
How did you get picked for that job? Were you naturally good at it?
I don't know. I was going to ask my brothers that. I got stuck with it. But at first, I was probably 8. She had me pasting the wallpaper, and she would hang it. And after I might have been 11 or 12, her arthritis in her knees, she didn't want to be on a ladder, so she got me papering, and she was pasting. So.
Did you like the work? Did you find it to be a drag?
No, I really enjoyed it.
That's cool.
The worst part was it was a 100-plus-year-old house, and there was probably 10 layers of wallpaper on the plaster. So it was it was an apartment house. So it wasn't perfection.
Yeah.
But she was very fussy.
Did she make sure that it was done to her satisfaction? Like she was fussy about it?
Oh, you had to match all the patterns, and I had to do the corners the way you're supposed to do the corners. And she did a good job. She had a lot of $2 roll wallpaper, and we just did it.
What did you do then after? Like, what did you move on to after mastering the papering trade or papering in the family enterprise?
Well, that was kind of in my background as far as my interest. I love the outdoors, love fishing and camping, and did a lot of it. I was a pretty individual guy. I didn't need a lot of people. My oldest brother took me camping when I was probably 8 or 9 years old with his friends, and I learned camping and how to cook. And my folks would let me take off out of St. Johnsbury 4 or 5 miles and pedal my bike down and set up my pup tent and buy a water andrick and catch my trout and spend the night and pedal home the next day.
Do you think that being a cabinet maker is a good fit for someone who's comfortable being by themselves?
I guess so, because it can get lonely in the shop. I live by the radio. If I'm not making too much noise, the radio's always in the background, and I much prefer to work with people, and it's just the way things worked out. I always hoped to get a partner, and that just never happened. So.
So is it mostly kitchen cabinets you're doing now, or are you still doing the work every day?
Yeah, I do kitchen cabinets and staircases and custom cabinets, trim, flooring, pretty much everything.
How did you learn the craft?
Well, actually, I started out in a laminate shop and
making laminate countertops
and cabinets, and it was pretty serious work. We did a bunch of dozens of IBM cabinets for their computers back when computers were the size of a refrigerator. So
and they had custom cabinets to put the stuff in, right?
Sure, they were airtight laminate cabinets with an orange plexiglass door, and they actually had a couple of hoses up the back corners drawing air out of the cabinet the whole time. And so we did a lot of laminate kitchens and And they had a tub surround, a Formica 202 tub surround that was a company that made matching moldings in the laminate that you were using. And they held up really well. I did a slew of bathrooms that way.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And where was this company located, Dennis?
Right in Waterford, and they service Vermont, a good portion of Vermont and New Hampshire. And yeah, it was, we would build an average large kitchen per day, countertop with a couple of small countertops every day.
Did you like that work?
I did, but it was, it's the glue was too strong. We had a spray system in the shop that wasn't bad, but after about 3.5 years, I had enough of that, and I went to work for a builder that was doing some real serious buildings, and that didn't last real long. I worked for him for about 6 or 7 months, and I enjoyed the crew and everything. He was just a wise guy. He was hard to work for, and he promised me a raise in health insurance and didn't offer either. So I got done and thought I was going to sell insurance, and went to an accident insurance company. I went to school for a couple of weeks. In the first week in town, they gave me renewals, and I made like $600 and bought a television. The second week, I got a town with just cold calls, and I made $60.
Oh, so they were just trying to get you in there, right?
Yeah, and then I realized when this farmer had lost his thumb in a farming accident, and he paid $68 for years. Every 6 months, he got $25 from the company. So
that was that.
So I gave up on that, and I built a house with my uncle in a little campground in St. Johnsbury. And things were getting tight at Christmas time. My wife gave me a tennis racket, and I returned it for $14 and put it in the paper, and went to work on it.
And then what was next?
Well, that was actually the laminator that I had learned my trade through started having me do his installations, and it really took off, and it was not the direction I really wanted to go in because of the glue, but I had like 15 or 20 contractors that I was doing all of their laminating in, and some big bars in the schools, big showers and stuff. So,
but then all of a sudden that work went away, or maybe you left it before it went away.
Yeah, well, it kind of went away, and a business slowed down, and the product had been out long enough that contractors started doing their own laminate work, really a lot of it. And I was looking to get out of it, so went to work for a company that puts up steel buildings for a couple of months in the dead of winter, and really didn't get paid much of anything. I was a head carpenter, but I did that, and I was just looking for work or whatever, and thinking about getting out of the trade because I was so in the glue. And FedEx moved into the area, and I was one of the first people they hired
to drive a truck.
Yeah, to do a route. Unfortunately, I had all my carpenter's experience, so they had me build an office in a warehouse for like 2 months while everybody else was on the road learning their thing. But it went well, and I loved traveling around, and I was on the same route for 4 years up into northern New Hampshire, and it's just the same thing. And the hours weren't right for me. It didn't start until 9:30. We'd get our freight, and we had to work till 7 for, and take a 2-hour lunch. And I found myself driving along my routes looking at, here's a new pile of logwood for this guy, and then I watch him cut it all up, and then he splits it, and all of a sudden, he's dropping another load of wood. I got to do something different.
What was it like driving the woods of Vermont and New Hampshire in a FedEx delivery truck in winter?
It was interesting. It was very interesting. If the freight couldn't get out of Burlington or something, they would send a couple of us. We had 4-wheel drive Suburbans, and we would race down to Manchester, New Hampshire to get the freight on airplanes. And on Saturdays, every so often, you had to go get the freight in Burlington and be over there by 7. And it was interesting. There was a lot of stuff around the airports that I found interesting, and the customers were great. And the company was great. My manager, I can't say was great.
Well, so when did you start the cabinet business?
Well, and I meant to tell you, that whole 4 years that I drove for FedEx, I was just wanting to get out of laminate and get into woodworking, and I studied every fine woodworking magazine for 4 years that came out on my dates. Decided I was going to build a shop, and self-taught a lot of it. And so in '88, I quit working for FedEx, and I had a shop in my basement. I've been working on my house ever since I got up here in 1980, along with FedEx. So I was getting pretty good at the craft, but
Well, we should tell folks that your basement is like a lot of basements in, the Northeast. It's probably got a 6-foot ceiling height, and your wood burner is down there. And like, how was it making kitchen cabinets in that space?
it wasn't bad. It was actually the challenge of some countertops that I built, and I remember one I had to have like 5 guys and up the bulkhead and straight up the house and twist it a certain way. I almost couldn't get it out of the basement. But yeah,
This was a wood countertop, presumably?
no, this was a big laminate top for a church kitchen. It's just huge. I should have probably built it in place.
Yep.
But
And then after you had a barn on the property, and then you made that into the workshop, right?
correct, yeah.
And how long have you been working out of that space? And can you tell us a little bit about it?
Since 1990, it's a 30 by 40 story and a half gambrel with a full basement, and I built it pretty much alone. With neighbors came over on a Saturday and stood the 2 long walls up with me, and went away and came back and stood the end walls up, and had a little bit of help roofing, but I built most of it myself.
And it's all insulated and conditioned and lit up and
yeah,
and what? Go ahead.
Freshly wired 2x6 construction with fiberglass, and actually I used type wire and never sheathed it. The vertical siding is my sheeting. I just blocked it like 3 times, and it just heats excellent.
That's great. And can you tell folks what kind of machines you have?
Well, I got a 24-inch Powermatic. I've got a big DeWalt 30-inch crosscut saw. I've got a Delta X table saw, and I've got a big stroke sander from the old days, and about a 7-foot pattern maker's lathe.
Can you tell folks about that sander? Because I have never seen one before or since the one in your shop.
The stroke sander?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a sander with 2 cast iron ends on it. What it is, it's about a 20-foot belt, spins around, and the grit is facing the table, not the grit is down on the belt as it goes around, and the table is adjustable. It can roll it in and back and forth, and then you take a sanding pad and you just you sand anything up to, you can even take the table is on rollers. You can roll the table right out from under it and do side cabinets and whatnot. But
it's the original wide belt sander, right?
It is. They still actually use them for butcher block tops in factories. I've done a ton of tops on it, up to 5 feet by 9 feet long. So.
And it probably dates to the early 20th century, right?
Yeah, I have no idea. I've always wanted a time saver, but the picture's on my office wall, and I never did do it.
You also did highway work for a period, right?
Yeah, I did. When I got out of high school, I went to Seaward Construction. They were putting in a 440,000 volt power line from the Moore Dam on the Connecticut River all the way through all of our hills to Irisburg, Vermont. And it was quite an eye-opener. It's the ruggedest work I ever did.
You mean physically taxing?
Physically. Oh, man, they had a huge bulldozer with a 3-foot auger on it, and these power poles were 80 to 100 feet high. So we'd get in location and exact the spot where the pole was going to be, and he would drill a 3-foot hole about 12 feet deep, and then we'd start shoveling and backfilling, and we had to jump in the hole with these pogo tamps that were running off a big compressor, and you learned right off to get steel boots.
Because inevitably the tamper is going to jam you in the foot, right?
Yeah, it did. So you did that 4 or 5 times for each pole until it was up to, until it was full. And also I was a grunt. We hoisted all of the crossbars and the bells up to the linemen, and really rough work, really incredible where we walked through swamps and just everywhere. It was pretty interesting.
People say that those jobs pay great, and that's why you do them, despite the traveling burdens and the physical toll on your body. But I presume it pays better than the job at the laminate shop.
But yeah, that was $2.20 an hour. This was $3.30. I'm old. But yeah, it was interesting.
And why did you leave that work? If I I
They
could
completed
guess,
the power
but
line.
yeah.
They completed the power line, but in the dead of winter, one story that I'll never forget. It was so cold; it was like 20 below at the end of the process of building that power line, and our jobs were to grunt stuff up to them, but also keep a fire going. They were just freezing every 10 minutes. They'd have to come down and warm their hands. So I had a friend up on the pole, and he missed the hook on the way down. The ground was frozen. He came down like 50 feet and just slammed into the ground, and stood up, and then he threw himself on his back screaming. And I saw him 2 weeks later in his girlfriend's car, sitting in the back seat with both legs in casts up on the front seat. It's like,
Oh my
man,
God.
that's a
How do you
hard.
physically drill a hole in temperatures like that? I
Uh,
mean,
oh, it was just incredible. They built fires under the winches on the bulldozers. There was one other event that late evening. It was really dark out, and they had a huge bulldozer that were trying to cross a fairly small river and get it back in the field. And he got to the bank, and it just sunk down to where his seat was the only thing out of the water. And where all these guys and the bulldozer was sinking in the river, so they brought another just huge dozer, and they linked winch to winch with like 1 inch cables. And when they both started pulling, the cables snapped, and it lit the sky up. I think for seconds, we could see everybody, every equipment in the field, and loud. Never seen anything like it.
what happened to the bulldozer?
They pulled it back across the river the next day. So interesting stuff.
Um, can you tell me a little bit about your house? You said you bought it, I believe it was 1980. What did you buy, and what has happened to it in the intervening years?
Okay, well, we bought it in around 80. It was an 1840 plank house. It's got 3 inch planks mortised into 8x8s, top and bottom plates.
So we should
And
explain to folks who this is a peculiar thing to Yankee builders, right? It's not a timber frame. It's big, thick boards that actually support the roof, right?
right, right. They're 3 inches, and there's usually an inch to an inch and a half apart with two doweling to get together. And they would go along, and they might skip a 6 inch hole if they wanted to. So when I started tearing into it, I realized that it was plank, and I was like, damn, I can't. I didn't want to frame up inside walls, so I put two layers of 3/4 Thermax on the outside, on the inside of the plank, and on the outside I put a 1/2 inch of Thermax and vertically sided it with boards, shiplap boards, and it was all right, but it wasn't tight enough to. We were burning. We had a wood boiler in the basement, a really nice Frank's wood boiler out of Canada, and it did an excellent job, except when the wind really blew.
Right.
So with all that's gone on recently with this pandemic and everything, and my work just stopped, and I just was keeping an eye on, thinking about, is this the time to replace the windows? They were wood windows, and they were getting bad, and so we just decided to do it. I'm doing a zip system. I tore the siding off and a 1/2 inch Thermax, and put new Anderson 400s in my windows, and the zip system is a 2.5 inch panel. It's 2 inches of insulation, an R12 with a 1/2 inch zip board, and it was just a blast to put it on. I also dug up the foundation down 3 feet with a friend with a shovel.
You don't like this guy, right?
Pressure washed the foundation and foamed it with 2 inches, and I'm really happy with that, because the zip system sat right on top of the foam, and plus I foamed all of the plank cracks that I had never foamed. About a 200 square foot, toucan foam system, which was just perfect for buttoning up all my mistakes from when I was a kid and didn't even put fiberglass in there.
Yeah. Well, people worried about that less then, right? I think you'd agree.
Yes, yeah. If you were
Yeah.
in the wood, it's like, oh, I'll put a little bit here and there, but yeah.
So, and have you noticed an improvement with your new exterior insulation?
Yeah, drastically. We didn't put any wood in the basement. We've got our little Vermont castings in the living room, and we're burning one stick every 2 or 3 hours. And
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I still have one side of the house to do next year, so yeah, very happy with it.
And how are you siding over the zip system, zip R sheathing, I think they call it, right?
I'm going to go back to the same vertical shiplap
Cool.
I was going to get a little fancy, but I got too much on my plate. So,
Yeah. And has the family been supportive of this effort? Have you gotten any help from Bernadette or
oh yeah,
Dylan, your son?
yeah, absolutely. Dylan came over for a weekend, and we did a ton of work. It was really, we did most of the work in 3 days. I had one hired guy and Dylan, and he's fantastic.
So we should talk a little bit about Dylan, who has become a very skilled artisan himself, right?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
What does he do?
He's working for a pretty high-end cabinet and wood shop company, and just doing really good work for them. They did a $2 million job in New York City that involved, I guess, 90 doors, and they made all the doors and jambs and trim for all of that, and went down and installed it in New York. And I went over and saw these doors, and I don't know what the finish is. They look like you dipped them in liquid glass. I've never seen a finish like it.
And he makes guitars too, which I think is pretty cool.
Makes guitars from scratch and makes his own necks with carbon fiber reinforcement and all of the electronics. He studied electronics and puts them together like, he's technical. He's kind of ashamed of me. He wears a jeweler's scope to do the inlay on his guitar necks, and it's like, really?
Did you teach him stuff when he was growing up? Did he have an interest then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was in the shop. I was nervous about him running tools, and I finally just had to, like myself, we were similar in how we were careful around tools, and I explained a lot to him about pressure in wood and things that can happen that happened to me over time. And he's good. He's really good.
What would you tell parents about who have kids who have an interest in building stuff? Obviously there's a lot of risk compared to sitting at home with an iPad.
Right.
What advice would you give them?
Well, if they're younger kids, I would say start them on somewhat safer tools where you can't actually cut your finger off like a jigsaw, where you might,
It's going to hurt, but it's not going to cost a digit. Yeah.
And yeah, just watch over and keep a heavy hand. And once you feel confident that they're understanding that you got to really hold the wood when you're cutting and things like that.
When do you think is, I'm sure it varies with the kid, but when do you think is an appropriate age group to start letting them use more dangerous power tools or less dangerous power tools?
I would say 6 or 7 or 8, depending on the child. Absolutely.
My uncle gave me my first electric drill when I was probably 8 or 10, so there you go.
Right? Yeah, I had a bunch of Cub Scouts in my shop once, and they all made little toolboxes, and they all cut their own little ends, like a little gable end on the jigsaw, and they loved it.
It's a shame because when Liam was in Cub Scouts, they were telling the parents not to have the kids play with real tools, which made me sad because, of course, they love it, and it's awesome.
Right.
I know that working in the trades has taken its toll on your body. You've had back problems and I think shoulder problems for probably decades. What would you tell your younger self about staying healthy while doing trade work?
Well, in my case, it was going to happen no matter what. I've got a degenerative disc thing going on, but I was extremely healthy through most of the years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dropping off now. I've got a sciatic thing going on, so it's different things. But no, if I knew what I was going to end up with this kind of problems that I have, I think I would have probably wanted to go for being an architect. I was really good at it. I worked with a lot of architects, and stuff comes to me easy, and I can see a finished product and know the right way to build it. So
tell me honestly, when you were growing up, was the family financial situation one that you could have gone to architecture school?
Not really. There was 6 kids, and my father was a teamster driving a truck, and my guidance counselor said, it'd be almost impossible for you to go to college. And I was more wanting to get out of the house and get right to work. I was out of the house the day I graduated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you tell young people who are in the trades now? How should they protect themselves?
Well, the sun is a big thing. I've loved not. I just worship the sun. I never wore a hat, a shirt, and I've had a bunch of skin cancer, and now I can't even let the sun hit my head. So it's definitely wear shirts, sunscreen, hats, masks. But
That's,
no.
we talk about safety in this Pro Talk podcast a lot, and that's
Mm,
something no one has mentioned, and I think it's a very good point.
yeah, yeah, it really had an impact on me. I didn't see it coming, but I asked my dermatologist. I said I don't remember the sun being this hot, and he said it wasn't. We've destroyed our ozone, so it's a thing to take seriously. Yeah.
You and Bernadette have been impossibly kind to Carol and I. You helped us move from Pittsburgh. You drove from Westbrook, Vermont to the city of Pittsburgh to help us move up to South Burlington. You've hosted us and fed us great food on many occasions, but perhaps your greatest gift was at helping us expand the second floor of our house in Stowe, Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And you, Bernadette, and Dylan helped us for days. And you must have recognized that we were completely in over our heads. What were you thinking when this was all going on?
Oh, I didn't think you were in over your head. I knew you had the talent and the plans drawn up. I knew that your help was a little light in the trade. So, and I looked at it as a barn raising. I love Carol and you, and we had a blast. We went over and got it done in a few days. It just went really well.
It was over a long 4th of July weekend, and I can tell listeners that I was never so relieved, except when I would hear the sound of your diesel Power Stroke pickup truck coming toward the house on those mornings, and I was like, oh, thank God, there's a chance this might actually get done.
Well, we did it. We did it well, and you treated us great. You provided us with a beautiful shirt and lobster. I go a long ways for lobsters, all the way to Maine, several times a summer.
Carol was reminding me that we have some fantastic photographs of you and the family and our friends from that experience, and I'll put those on the podcast page so you all can see Uncle Dennis in his glory. And I thank you. We made some money on that house. I don't know if you knew.
I figured you would. Stowe, Vermont.
I think we paid $90,000 for that piece of junk, and we got ripped off, I'm sure. And then we sold it for, I think it was $230 with the second floor. Yeah, so it was the only time I've ever made any money in my whole life.
Fantastic.
You've made what I describe as a good life being a carpenter and living off the land in a beautiful place, but with a tough climate. I think most folks would agree. What is the appeal of living in such a cold place?
What is the what?
What's the appeal of living in such a cold place?
I don't know. I'm just glad I was born in Prudhoe Bay, because I'd probably be up there wishing I could be in Vancouver. I have cousins up in Alaska, and I couldn't take any more winter than we have.
It's the coldest place I've ever been, Dennis. The night of, I believe it was after first night, Terry and I came to visit you, and I want to say your outdoor thermometer said it was 30-some below zero, and that's exciting for those of you who've never experienced it, I got to say.
Yeah, that's different. That's to the point where you can throw a glass of hot water up in the air and it just pops right into snow.
It's physically hurts, right? It's painful. Yeah.
It's dangerous. One night getting done with the power line crew, they dropped us at our cars, and my $30 58 Ford wouldn't start. Everybody drove off, and it was 20, 30 below, so I thought I'd hitchhike. So I started walking. It's like 30 miles to St. Johnsbury, and no cars were coming in. I thought I was going to lose my fingers. I finally saw a car coming. I had to jump in the middle of the road and freaked him right out. But I said, sorry, I had to...
I'm going to die if you don't help me. Yeah.
So yeah,
oh my
it
God.
would be brutal if anything happens where you get stranded. You haven't got much time, for sure.
Coincidentally, we weren't even living here at the time, but you commented that you'd like to live in Southern Connecticut. What appeals to you about this climate versus West Burke?
Oh, gardening season. We garden. We've gardened forever, and we can lose a garden in middle of June. We can have a frost. Like last year, it bit our tomatoes. We went to my brother's in Connecticut once and lost our whole garden in August. Early August, it froze. We weren't uncovered up. It's frustrating. Your stuff almost makes it, and it freezes. Short season. So I like a shorter winter, milder winter, hotter summer is fine with me.
Well, maybe we have to arrange some kind of switch, because I know Liam would move to West Burke in 10 minutes. He would have his bag packed and be up by the road.
But,
Well, it has been a pleasure talking to you, Dennis. Is there anything you want to ask or tell our listeners before we go?
well, I think an interesting thing that we didn't touch on was the road construction when the interstate came down through from, well, when I got on it, it was up in Barton and it went all the way to Woodsville. It was about 50 miles of interstate. And it was just amazing. It was like a bunch of guys in a big sand pit with great big toys to play with. It was absolutely incredible. And the bridge construction turned out putting out a whole bunch of carpenters when the road was completed. I've got several friends that are builders that went right into building, and like myself, and so it was interesting. It was.
Would you tell folks to look to that work to get skills for that career or another career?
I think the most fun I ever had was road construction, just because I missed all the people that I was working with, and the bridge construction was amazing. When you go drive by an interstate bridge and you see the columns that are supporting it, we would be in a crane bucket and with 3-yard dumpsters, cement
Pots, yeah.
right, dumping a half a yard at a time, and inside these 4-foot columns was spiral rebar. So we'd have to go down every half a yard. They'd send down a vibrator, and we'd vibrate it, come back up, and then another half yard, and the other guy goes down. But it was amazing. And then we had to wrap those columns in a crane bucket with wet canvas.
You can still see that to this day, right? You can see the impression made from those
Sure.
curing materials, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we had no nets under the bridges. It was, I don't even know if OSHA was around at the time. But yeah, that was just something I found interesting, that how many excavators and contractors came out of the construction when it went away. So.
Well, I hope we have, a similar infrastructure push in the coming years, because God knows we need it. That stuff's getting old now, and we need that stuff.
It could revive the country, really. Yeah, it's true.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thanks to Dennis Bessette for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Everybody, thank you very much for listening. Stay safe and happy building. Thanks, Uncle Dennis.